It all started with a plate of rice and a blind child left alone in the rain. But here's the question. How can a single act of kindness from someone poor and powerless transform not just one life, but an entire family, a broken CEO, and a corporate world built on cold logic? If you've ever wondered whether goodness still matters in today's world, whether doing the right thing, even in silence, is still worth it, this story will give you your answer. Because in a world where betrayal is easy and compassion is rare, one woman's quiet courage reminds us that dignity, truth, and love can still win. So grab your seat and lean in, because what began as a simple gesture from a struggling waitress will take you on a journey through envy, injustice, redemption, and ultimately, a love that healed everything. What if a single moment of kindness, done quietly in the rain, was the very act that changed your entire destiny, without you even knowing it? It was just another rainy evening in Lagos. Inside a small restaurant tucked between noisy street stalls and broken pavements, a tired young waitress named Sarah carried a tray from one table to the next. Her feet ached from standing all day, and the message from her landlord earlier that morning still weighed heavily on her heart. Rent had gone up again. She didn't know how she'd pay it. But she smiled anyway, out of habit, because that's what good service meant. Behind her smile, though, were real worries. A sick mother back in the village, unpaid bills, and the growing fear that her life might never change. Then, just as she passed the front glass door, something made her stop. Outside, sitting alone on a wooden bench in the pouring rain, was a small boy. He wasn't moving. He didn't even flinch when thunder cracked through the sky. She squinted through the glass. He held a white cane in his hands. He was blind. His head was bowed, his thin jacket soaked. No umbrella, no adult nearby, nothing but the cold and the steady sound of rain hitting his body. Sarah's heart skipped. For a second, she told herself to look away. It wasn't her problem. She had customers waiting, orders to fill, a life too full of burdens already. But something inside her wouldn't let her turn away. She pushed the door open and stepped out into the storm. The rain soaked her instantly, but she didn't care. She rushed to the boy, knelt beside him, and gently took his hand. "Come with me," she whispered. "Let me take you inside." The boy didn't argue. He stood slowly, holding her arm tightly. She led him past the curious stares of the diners, past the counter, and sat him near the warmest corner by the window. His hands trembled, his clothes clung to his skin. Without a second thought, she wiped the rain from his face with a napkin, then ran to the kitchen and scooped a plate of steaming hot jollof rice, the last plate meant for a paying customer. She fed him slowly, gently, like a mother would feed her child. He ate in silence, except for one soft moment when he smiled and whispered, "Thank you, ma'am. You are very kind." Sarah blinked away a tear. She didn't know who this boy was. She didn't know his father was watching from a car across the road. She didn't know that this small act of compassion, one she didn't think twice was about to change her life forever. Because what Sarah didn't see was the man in the car, frozen in shock. The billionaire father of the boy she just saved. A man whose heart had long turned cold, now slowly beginning to thaw. What happens when a powerful man with everything, wealth, status, success, suddenly realizes he has nothing at all where it matters most? Desmond was a man everyone respected. He walked through his towering glass offices in Lagos like a shadow, cold and untouchable. The CEO of a powerful company, he had built an empire from the ground up. His name opened doors. His wealth bought silence. And yet, behind those heavy office doors and expensive suits, lived a man who hadn't truly smiled in 7 years. Not since the day his wife, Amara, died while giving birth to their only child, Jacob. From that moment on, Desmond didn't just lose a partner. He lost himself. He turned inward, choosing silence over conversation, work over connection, and business over fatherhood. He provided Jacob with everything money could buy: private tutors, custom-tailored clothes, even a grand house with more rooms than people to fill them. But Jacob was blind. He couldn't see the marble floors or gold-rimmed walls. What he needed wasn't luxury, it was love. And Desmond didn't know how to give it. He saw the boy as a reminder of what he lost, not as someone who desperately needed a father. Then, one evening, everything shifted. Desmond had taken Jacob out to eat, a rare moment of connection he was trying to build. But when a business call came in, Desmond left the boy sitting outside in the rain, promising to return in just a few minutes. He didn't even realize how long he had stayed in the car. He was too busy talking to investors, too consumed by numbers and negotiations to notice that his child, blind and alone, was being drenched by a downpour just feet away from him. But someone else noticed. Sarah, a waitress with aching feet and no savings, saw the boy and couldn't turn away. She brought Jacob inside, dried his hair, and fed him gently with her own hands. Through the glass, Desmond looked up and saw something that shattered the walls around his heart. A woman, poor, tired, unknown, was showing his son more love in 5 minutes than he had shown in years. And for the first time in forever, he felt something. It wasn't anger. It wasn't control. It was shame and hope. He watched her feed Jacob, wipe his hands, and speak softly to him like he mattered. That small window into real care cracked something inside Desmond. It wasn't just about gratitude, it was about reflection. Who had he become? A man who could build a company, but couldn't hold his own child. That night, Desmond did something he hadn't done in years. He felt, and that feeling would become the first step on a path he never expected to take, a path toward redemption, healing, and maybe even love. What if the simple act of helping a stranger in the rain opened a door you never even knew existed? One that led not just to survival, but to purpose, dignity, and a brand new life. Sarah didn't know that her life was about to change forever. She didn't expect applause, reward, or recognition. She didn't help the blind boy in the rain because of what he might give her or who he might be. She did it because her heart told her to. But fate has a strange way of returning kindness, especially when it comes from someone who has nothing left to give. That rainy night outside the restaurant wasn't just a passing moment. It was the moment a billionaire named Desmond saw something rare. A waitress, worn down by hardship, still found the strength to show compassion. And it struck him harder than any business deal ever had. Desmond, CEO of a major company, had spent years trapped in grief and silence. He had watched life pass by from behind tinted car windows and polished boardroom glass. But that night, from inside his car, he watched something else. Humanity. He saw Sarah wipe the rain from Jacob's face. He saw her feed him with her own hands. And he saw a kind of care that couldn't be bought. That image stayed with him long after the rain stopped. It followed him home, into the empty silence of his mansion, and it whispered something he hadn't heard in a long time. Do something that matters. 3 days later, Sarah heard a knock on her door. She wasn't expecting anyone, especially not the man she saw briefly in the restaurant. But there he was, Desmond himself, standing in the narrow hallway of her modest apartment, holding a brown envelope. He didn't come with flashy gifts. He didn't offer cash. What he offered was something far greater, a new beginning. Inside the envelope was a job offer, not just any job, but a full-time position as his human relations assistant, with benefits, stability, and a place to live. For Sarah, it was like stepping into a dream she never dared to imagine. She stood frozen, overwhelmed by emotion. "Why me?" she asked quietly. Desmond smiled. "Because you saw my son. Because you cared, when no one else did." Sarah didn't have a resume filled with degrees. She didn't come from privilege, but she had something that no money could buy: integrity, empathy, and the kind of heart that sees people as people, not problems. And that, Desmond believed, was exactly what his company needed. From that moment on, Sarah's life began to transform. She walked into the same office building she used to pass every day, not as an outsider, but as someone who belonged. All because, on one rainy night, she chose kindness over convenience. She chose to act when it would have been easier to look away. And that decision turned out to be the key that opened the door to a life she had only dreamed of. When a rising star enters the spotlight, someone in the shadows always takes notice, and not everyone claps for you when you shine. Sarah was finally beginning to find her place. From serving tables to walking the halls of a corporate high-rise, her journey had been nothing short of extraordinary. Hired not because of her resume, but because of her rare character, Sarah quickly became a quiet force within the company. She wasn't the loudest in the room, but she was the most sincere. She greeted everyone. She listened when others talked. And most importantly, she cared. That simple human quality began to shift the culture around her, and even Desmond, the once cold CEO, started to thaw in her presence. But not everyone was happy to see her grow. In a corner office sat Mr. Frank, a senior staff member who had been with the company for over 6 years. He watched Sarah closely, not with admiration, but with suspicion. He had fought for years to gain favor, to be noticed, to climb the ladder one rung at a time. And yet, here she was. A newcomer, a former waitress, gaining Desmond's trust, attending meetings, and even speaking in front of the board. It was more than his ego could take. He masked his resentment with a smile, but inside, he was planning. Then came the trap. One evening, long after everyone had gone home, Frank approached Sarah's desk with a polite smile. "My laptop's acting up," he said casually. "Mind if I use yours for just a minute?" Sarah, ever helpful, stepped aside without question. She had no idea that within seconds, he was using her system to send out a confidential company document from her email. The damage was done in under a minute. By morning, her name was at the center of a corporate storm. When Desmond summoned Sarah to his office, she walked in with trembling hands. On his desk lay the printed email, showing her name as the sender of a financial leak that could jeopardize the company's future. Her heart dropped. "Sir, I didn't send this," she said, voice shaking. Desmond looked at her carefully. "I believe you," he said softly. "But the board won't. Not without proof." That moment was the turning point. Most bosses would have dismissed her. Most companies would have let her go. But Desmond chose to fight with her, not against her. Together, they stayed after hours, searching system logs, reviewing access times, piecing together the truth. Sarah was exhausted, but she never gave up. She wasn't just fighting for a job. She was fighting for her name, her dignity, her second chance. And eventually, they found it. The login timestamp, the flash drive, the lie behind Mr. Frank's borrowed minute. The evidence was undeniable. Sarah had been framed by someone who couldn't bear to see her rise. That betrayal would lead to a reckoning. But Sarah? She stood tall. Because while envy may whisper behind your back, truth always finds its voice. It takes courage to fight for the truth when everyone's ready to believe a lie. But when the storm breaks and the truth comes out, who will still be standing? The boardroom was tense. Every eye was on Sarah as she walked in, holding a brown file tightly against her chest. Just days earlier, she had been celebrated as a rising star, someone who brought heart and humanity into a cold corporate world. But now, she stood accused of leaking the company's financial records, her name stamped on an email that could destroy everything she had worked so hard for. Most people would have broken under that pressure. Most would have crumbled beneath the weight of false blame. But not Sarah. Not today. As she stood before the board, she could hear the whispers. She did it. She's only been here a few weeks. We trusted her too quickly. But Sarah didn't flinch. She opened her file slowly and placed it on the table. I didn't send that email, she said calmly, but I know who did. That moment froze the room. She pointed across the table. Mr. Frank used my system that night. He said it would take only a minute, and while I stepped out to close the window, he sent the file from my login. The room was silent. One board member leaned in. Do you have proof? Sarah nodded. Yes. And then, from the side of the room, Desmond stood up. She's telling the truth, he said firmly. We reviewed the security logs. The system shows Frank's access. The login time matches exactly when the email was sent. He handed over a printed report. It's all there. Mr. Frank's face turned pale. He tried to argue, but the data spoke louder than words. The same men who once doubted Sarah now turned their eyes toward him. Eyes that once respected, now full of disappointment. So you tried to frame her? One asked. Why? Another whispered. But no answer came. Only silence. Sarah looked around the room. She had nothing fancy. No degrees on the wall, no legacy in the company, just the truth. And today, that was enough. Desmond turned to the board. This company cannot stand on lies and sabotage. If we don't protect the innocent, we have no foundation. Then he looked back at Frank. You're fired. Effective immediately. As security led Frank out of the room, Sarah took a slow breath. Her hands were still trembling, but her heart was steady. She hadn't just proven her innocence, she had proven her strength. And Desmond? He couldn't hide the pride in his eyes. You stood your ground, he said quietly, and I'm proud of you. For Sarah, that moment meant more than any promotion or paycheck. It was the moment she reclaimed her name, her dignity, her place, not because someone gave it to her, but because she fought for it. Sometimes the love you never expected walks into your life on a rainy day, not dressed in diamonds, but in an apron, holding a plate of rice and a heart full of kindness. It started with a plate of warm food and a gentle hand wiping rain off a blind boy's face. Sarah didn't know then that this simple act of kindness would become the beginning of something much greater. She had no idea that her quiet compassion would ripple through the heart of a man who had long forgotten how to feel. But Desmond felt it. First, as a quiet stirring, then as something deeper, and in time, as something undeniably real. The woman who once served tables in silence had unknowingly served something more, healing, not just for Jacob, the blind boy, but for Desmond himself. As the days passed, Sarah became more than just an employee at Desmond's company. She became a light in the lives of two people who had been trapped in grief and emotional distance for years. Jacob looked forward to her visits. Her voice brought him joy, her stories gave him comfort, and her presence made the house feel alive. Desmond watched all this from a distance. At first, he saw how Sarah helped Jacob with his Braille lessons, how she guided his hand to the edge of the cup, how she laughed freely and hugged without hesitation. Slowly, the walls around Desmond's heart began to crumble. It wasn't about admiration anymore. It was connection. And in that connection, Desmond found something he thought he had lost forever: hope. One evening, after Sarah had helped prepare dinner and made Jacob giggle at the table, Desmond sat quietly beside his son. The lights were dim. The house was still. Jacob, he asked softly, how do you feel when Sarah is around? Jacob smiled immediately. Happy. She talks to me. She helps me. Desmond nodded, holding his son's hand. Would you like it if Sarah became part of our family? If she were your mom? Jacob's face lit up. Yes, Daddy. Please. I want her to be my mommy. That moment broke something open in Desmond's soul. The man who had spent years in silence was finally ready to speak, with his heart. Not long after, he invited Sarah to dinner at a quiet luxury restaurant. The air smelled of jasmine and soft music drifted in the background. Sarah wore a modest dress, her smile nervous but warm. Desmond didn't waste words. "You've brought peace to my home," he said. "You've given my son joy, and me, a reason to live again. Sarah, I'd like to marry you." Sarah was stunned. She looked down, her heart racing. "This is a big decision," she whispered. "Please give me some time." And Desmond nodded. Because real love waits. 1 week later, she walked into Desmond's house, holding Jacob's hand, and with tears in her eyes, said yes. That day, laughter filled their home like never before. And for the first time, 3 broken hearts began to beat as one. What if one small act of kindness today becomes the miracle that transforms your entire tomorrow? Sometimes, the smallest gestures carry the biggest weight. Sarah never imagined her life would unfold this way. She didn't wake up planning to change anyone's world. She was just a struggling waitress, trying to survive another day with a forced smile and an aching heart. But life has a quiet way of noticing those who act with goodness when no one is watching. And that rainy evening, when she reached out to a blind boy shivering alone on a bench, it wasn't for recognition or reward. It was instinct. It was love. And that one decision, to care, would end up being the very bridge that carried her from sorrow to salvation. That single act of compassion rippled through lives far beyond what she could see. She helped a child who couldn't see the sky. She comforted a boy whose own father had grown emotionally distant. And unknowingly, she awakened a man, Desmond, who had buried his heart in grief and silence. Sarah reminded him that kindness still existed, that there were people who gave, not because of wealth or status, but because it was simply the right thing to do. From that moment on, her life was never the same. A door opened that she never knew existed, not a door made of glass or gold, but one built on trust, humility, and character. Her integrity was tested, her loyalty challenged. She was even framed by someone who couldn't stand to see her shine. But through it all, she never let bitterness take root. She stood firm. She spoke truth. And in the end, truth defended her. Sarah's journey is a powerful reminder. The world doesn't always reward what's flashy, but it remembers what's real. It remembers the woman who fed a hungry child with her last plate of rice. It remembers the heart that held on to hope in a rented room with a blinking light bulb and no food in the cupboard. And it especially remembers the strength of someone who rises, not by stepping over others, but by lifting them. Her story teaches us that kindness may not pay instantly, but it always pays eventually. Sometimes it gives back in ways far greater than money, like finding a family, discovering purpose, or experiencing love so genuine it makes the past feel worth enduring. Sarah didn't chase success. She simply lived with compassion. And success, the right kind of success, found her. Desmond, once lost in his own shadows, found the light again through her. Jacob, once quiet and alone, found joy and safety in her presence. And Sarah, once unseen, finally found the recognition not of crowds, but of hearts that truly mattered. So what's the lesson here? Never underestimate the power of doing good when no one's watching, because someone always is. Maybe it's a stranger in a passing car. Maybe it's a child holding on to hope. Or maybe it's life itself, preparing to reward you in ways you never expected. In life, sometimes a small act of sincerity can change the fate of ourselves and those around us. The story of Sarah, a poor but compassionate waitress, is a testament to that truth. She did not help the blind boy because she expected anything in return, but simply because she could not turn away from the loneliness and helplessness of a child in the rain. It was that unconditional kindness that awakened the heart of a cold father, rekindled buried love, and revived a family. The profound lesson is just live well, even if no one sees, because dignity is the most precious asset of life. Especially for the elderly audience, this lesson is a gentle reminder that the good things we sow in life, sooner or later, will bloom. Sometimes not for us, but will be a shade for future generations. Never think you are too small to make a change, because sometimes just a look, a meal, or a kind word is enough to save a heart.